Walking in the halls, walking in the halls. Gonna find out about someone new today. Finding out something about that friend. Gonna learn something new today. Here at Weston Elementary, Weston Elementary. Gonna find out about someone new each and every episode. Hello, Eagle Nation. It's your elementary principal, Mr. Meyer, back with another season and another episode of Walking the Halls with the Principal. And I'm super excited about this particular episode because this is one that I've been working on for quite some time. And due to COVID and some other events, I haven't been able to get this guy to meet with me, but finally we made it happen. And so this episode is all about class of 1960s Don Seep and his story behind how President John F. Kennedy came to little old Weston High School in Cazenovia, Wisconsin, March 25th, 1960. He talks about that and a few other interesting items as well. And unfortunately, at the end of our video, our memory ran out of our camera. And so we're going to hopefully get a second follow-up episode in the future. But enjoy this episode. Don Seep, class of 1960.
I've been excited for over a year because about a year ago I interviewed Dido Nash.
Yes.
And Dido was a teacher of yours, is that correct?
Yes, she was.
Want to tell me about your memory of what it was like to have...
She was an excellent teacher, a very smart woman, and a woman of some class, classiness. She taught forensics, and I was trained in forensics under her, and I always enjoyed public speaking, and we had a number of plays that we were in high school as well.
Do you remember the one-act play that was in your I think it was your senior year? You did pretty well with it. I found it in your 1960 yearbook, Don.
Oh.
And it was. Let me just go back here. I'm going to read what it says, Don. All right. All right. And there's a picture of you, and I don't know her first name, but her first initial is D. Saltweedle.
Oh, Diane Saltweedle.
Yeah, okay. And then S. Moore. Who would that be?
That would be Sharon Moore. Now, perfect. Sharon just passed away about less than a year ago. She was a classmate. She was born and raised in Lime Ridge.
Okay.
And she was a dashing redhead.
Okay.
Very attractive young lady.
Here's what it says. It says, this year in dramatics, we chose one play to go on to the league competition. The one-act play chosen was the recognition scene from Anastasia, which was directed by Mrs. Nash. Do you recall that? It says the scene of the play was Berlin shortly after the Russian Revolution. Prince Paul, a distant relative of the Empress of Russia, persuades Anastasia to the long lost heir to have an audience with the Empress. You are the narrator of that. Do you recall any of that?
No, I don't.
No? Okay. Well, it did really well, apparently. It says we competed in the league contest and received an A rating. And then you went to Platteville, where you also received an A rating. And then you went to Whitewater, which was one step from state. And apparently you received a B rating at that.
Uh-huh.
So I thought that was kind of an interesting find.
Yes.
Yeah, so cool.
You know, I just can't remember the details.
Okay, well, that's okay.
Maybe that's a sign of advancing.
Oh no, so you graduated the class of 1960. Is that correct?
Yes.
And
we were the first full 4-year class.
First, and do you remember how many people were in your?
Around 50.
Around 50. I think that's about what I counted when I counted the sign.
There are a number, sadly, who are deceased. I think I talked to Luann Shane Crone, who was a classmate, just a couple of days ago, and she told me that there were, I think she said 29 members of my class that are deceased.
Okay.
The most recent one was Phil Christian, and I think he's probably in the yearbook there. And I was kind of shocked to hear that.
Sure.
We go to class reunions and we see our classmates and we say, "My God, those people are getting old," and and then you wonder on the way out the door, I wonder if they feel the same way about me.
Well, you look great, I would say, for
Thank
sure.
you.
I always play a game here, and I hope you'll humor me, Don.
Yes.
It's called Three Things, and when I say the word Weston or Weston School District, what is one person that comes to mind, one place, and maybe one thing?
One person, of course, is Joe Peplinski. He was our class advisor. He was part of this community for a number of years. Am I supposed to look at the camera?
Oh, you're doing great. You're fine.
And he had, before Weston was organized into a consolidated district, a K-12 district, he was a teacher at Lime Ridge when it was a high school.
Yes.
And then he came here, so he was part of this school from the beginning. And he was a World War II veteran.
Okay.
And one of those, the greatest generation that came back from I think he fought in the South Pacific. And he was a captain in the Army. He was very proud of his service.
Sure.
And he was a tremendous role model to us. He was always such a gentleman, a very patient teacher. He taught ag and shop and industrial arts and science class. They lived in Lime Ridge. They had 4 or 5 children. And he would take us on ag trips around, to various farms or other agricultural shows and for educational purposes. And sometimes he would drive to take us on class trips. I remember one time he took us to Madison on a class trip, and one of the places that we went to see, besides the state capitol and the historical museum, was they had just finished building the new city-county building where the county jail was.
Okay.
And it just so happened that he knew my uncle real well, who was the sheriff there.
Okay.
So we all got a tour of the jail. And we went from cell to cell, and the sheriff said hello to everybody and introduced them to us. And it was really a kind of a good education for us. But he was that kind of a guy. And he passed away about a year or so ago. Okay. And I think it was 2 years ago. And he wrote to me every year at Christmas, wherever I lived. I lived out west for 25 years in Seattle and Portland and LA. And he was not only was he a great teacher, but he was a very faithful friend. And so I found out that he passed away. He had fallen, and he had hit his head apparently on the sidewalk or something. And his funeral, he was the principal at Edgerton for a lot of years.
Okay.
They lived in Milton. Not the principal, the ag teacher.
Okay.
And so Raleigh Newman and I traveled together. I called Raleigh and told him about it. Raleigh always liked him a lot. And, all the students liked him. We drove down there. We had a great chat all the way, talking about all the memories we had of Joe Pep. When we got there, we were so impressed by his coffin. They had a wonderful display of his original Army captain's uniform, spick and span, kind of on a mannequin. Yeah. And I was so glad to see that. And his children were there, of course, all grown up now, and they're all around the country. One of them, I think, is a basketball coach in northern Wisconsin, and I've seen her a couple of times broadcasting when they have the state tournaments.
Okay.
I forget her first name. Her last name at the time was Peplinski, which is not an Irish name, by the way. He was so well liked and respected by the farmers in this community, and he was the kind of a guy that could be so folksy and sit down and visit with farmers and take all the time that they needed or he needed just to visit with them and introduce them to some of the farming practices. He conducted classes here for the veterans who came back for agricultural learning, and they had some sort of a scholarship or veterans funding for it. So all of the veteran farmers around here, you know, the young farmers, they knew him and they admired him so much. The nice memory I have also of Joe, since he was our senior science class advisor and our senior class advisor, when John Kennedy came here, he was designated by the principal or the administrator to help escort him to Weston.
Yes. So I want to talk about that some more. And I'm sorry I cut you off. Is there?
That's all right. Transition.
Yep, perfect. So clearly, you and others really did think a lot, very highly of Mr. Pep, as you referred to him in your speech.
Yes.
And I thought it would be kind of interesting if the viewers of this video could hear your words a little bit. I have your speech with me. Is it okay if I read some of your speech and
sure.
Maybe you can either respond to it or give me the backstory a little bit?
Yeah.
So before I get into the speech, though, you kind of you in your kind of memory or reflection writing of that day.
Yes, I wrote it that night.
Yes, you talk about what it was like to like wait for him, and you were in Cazenovia waiting for him. Tell me, what was going through your mind as a young person waiting for the future president of the United States in your vehicle?
Yes.
Who were you with? What were you thinking? All of that.
Very good. Well, you know, it was we got ready for that day for a long time prior to the day, and the teachers here were involved, and the social studies teacher and the principal was involved, and so we decided to have a dress-up day.
Okay.
All the students dressed up in suits and ties and to the nines.
Perfect.
And to have a band of reception for them and a welcoming committee of students. When the day came, he was supposed to arrive around 10 o'clock in the morning. He'd been traveling around this part of the state, stopping at various places, including the Hillsborough High School, which was the stop before he came to Cazenovia. And of course, you know, campaigns run behind. And so we waited there on the corner across from Saltwheel Store.
Okay.
And Joe Peplinski drove down there, and I think he had another student with him. And my dad and I drove down there, and the four of us were waiting basically on the corner. My mother went out and bought a new suit for me and made sure that I was presentable.
Yes.
And our patience was being tested. He didn't show up, and so there was some young kid there in town who acted as our runner. In those days, there was a telephone office in Cazenovia, and with the old switchboard system, each of the customers on the line had to ring on the wall. Our ring was a long and two shorts. They were party lines, and everybody listened to everybody, or most people did. That's how a lot of them got their news.
Uh-huh.
So anyway, we had this runner go over to the telephone office. That was about the only place in town that was open. And Tim Bergen owned the telephone company. He kept the lines open between the phone company and the principal's office here, keeping them informed. And in the meantime, the crowd was building up and the band was playing to keep people entertained in the gym here. Finally, they came along about 45 minutes or so late, and we saw 2 or 3 cars coming in sort of a caravan, and there was a couple of the cars that had behind a big car top sign on it. And the first car that came was the car that carried John Kennedy. And he was sitting in the front seat, and we went over to the car, and he opened the window or the door, and we shook hands, and I told him, I said, Senator, I've waited a long time for this. And he said, well, very nice to meet you, Don. And the driver was a man by the name of Lem Billings. Lem Billings was the vice president of an ad firm on Park Avenue called Lennon and Newell. And Lem Billings, his name was Kirk Lemoyne Billings, was a classmate of Kennedy's way back in prep school called Shumate Prep School. So they were lifelong friends, Lem Billings and the family. He spent every summer at the Kennedy compound. And so he was a very gifted guy. He invented the beverage that was made with what they called fizzies.
Okay.
And he went around from store to store and had free samples given out, and it boomed, and he became a millionaire as well as the sales. I don't think you hear of them anymore, but there was a time when they were very popular. So Kennedy tapped him to manage his campaign in western Wisconsin as his advance man and organizer. He was the driver. I can tell you more about how I first met him in the planning. Right. And in the back seat was the mayor of Madison, who was the state chairman of the Kennedy for President campaign. And his name was Ivan Nestigan. And Ivan Nestigan was, I think, shrewdly solicited or recruited to be the chair of this Kennedy campaign. And Ivan was a fine gentleman, well respected. He was a Norwegian Lutheran, and that was a perfect pick for Kennedy because at the time there was quite a religious issue.
Sure.
It was the first time that a Catholic had ever run for president, and Ivan Nestigan helped pave the way.
Sure.
And Dane County was full of Norwegians and full of Lutherans, as is most of Wisconsin. The state is predominantly Catholic and Lutheran. There it was then.
Yeah.
And those days, thankfully, are all pretty well healed. So we went to the car, we shook hands with him, and Kennedy said that, very nice to meet you, John, in that Boston accent, and I'm not doing very well with it. And he said, would you mind riding with us, and we could learn about what's ahead of us. And so
you get to an opportunity of a lifetime, and you get to sit in the same vehicle with the future president of the United States.
Yes.
Which is a really big deal for a not
senior
just
in high school.
A senior in high school, but for anyone.
Yes.
What was the conversation like on the way to school? What
Very good. he slid over in the middle of the front seat, which I thought was kind of unusual, but he did, and he asked me to slide in by him. And he said, as we drove along, he asked me a lot of questions. He said, Don, is this going to be a pretty good sized crowd? And I said, gee, I really think it's going to be a big crowd. I said, I'm sure there'll be over 500 people. Oh, fine, he said. And he said, at the time, Jimmy Hoffa was a big controversy. He was being investigated by the Senate Labor Rackets Committee. Bobby was the counsel for the committee. And he said, how did the farmers here feel about the economy? And I said, well, I really think they would like to see things improve. Of course, farmers always complain. And he said, how do they feel about labor? And I said, well, they don't like Jimmy Hoffa. Of course, there was so much adverse publicity about Jimmy Hoffa at the time. And as we drove up the road, he said, Don, who's going to introduce me? And I said, well, the senior science class has asked me to introduce you. And he said, well, fine. He said, have you said anything about my war record? The PT 109 thing in the Pacific was a big deal. Embarrassingly, I said, no, I'm sorry, I haven't. And he said, in my Pulitzer Prize, and he wrote Profiles in Courage, and I said, gee, I'm sorry, but I said quickly, I'd be very happy to recite it to you, and maybe we could insert that.
Yeah.
So he said, fine. And so I recited it, and I can remember it to this day. It was very short. It said, fellow students, friends, each year we invite noted speakers to our school to give their views on current issues. This year we are honored to have with us a man of both national and international stature, a candidate for the office of President of the United States, a United States Senator, the Honorable John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And I guess I'll never forget that.
Yeah, you nailed it. I've got your speech in front of me, and that was pretty much word for word what you said that day.
Yes.
So that was March 25th, 1960.
That was March 25th, and it was supposed to be at 10:30 in the morning.
So I'm curious. One of the things that I was in looking up, I had a hard time finding any solid records of his visit, other than you and Mrs. Nash and maybe a few people who were there that day.
Yes.
How did that happen? Because there's a website for the Archives for Kennedy.
Yes.
And he lists Hillsborough. Is it Hillsborough High School? Is that
yes.
And he lists Reedsburg, but they don't list Weston. So
yes.
Was that a sort of a last-minute kind of decision by the campaign?
No, it wasn't. It had been planned for quite some time.
Okay.
At least 6 weeks before.
Okay.
And it happened this way. I had heard about him going around the high schools and he and Humphrey were all over Wisconsin campaigning, from little village to cities, to farm auctions and what have you. They were both retail campaigners.
Yeah. And
so I had this nerve as a senior my dad was involved pretty much with the public life, and so he'd run for Congress a few years before. Okay. So I got on the phone and I called early in the morning. One morning, I called the mayor of Madison at his office a little after 8 o'clock, and I asked to speak to him. And he got on the phone. There was a lot of guts on my part.
Absolutely. I'm impressed.
I introduced myself, and I said, we are very interested in having Senator Kennedy come to our school and speak. I said, I know that he's speaking at other high schools, and we would do all we can to welcome him here. And I said, I'm speaking on behalf of our senior social science class. he said, Don, he said, thank you for calling. And he asked for the details of how to get a hold of me. And, and so a couple of weeks later, I got off the bus and there was a new white car there. It was a Chevrolet Impala, I think, with a Kennedy car top sign on it, and it had all kinds of campaign material in the back seat as I walked by it. And I went into the house, and here was this tall gentleman talking to my mother. It was Kirk Lemoyne Billings, and they had been visiting for about a half hour, waiting for me to get off the bus.
Okay.
So he had gotten the info to come out, and so we sat down and we made initial plans, and I had to go to the principal with it, and it had to go to the school board.
Okay.
The school board said he couldn't come.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Really?
And well, you know, there was some
politics of things
they
at the
were
time?
they were worried about the controversy
Sure.
of this was predominantly a non-Catholic community mostly,
Okay.
and unfortunately, it was an issue
Sure.
among some in the community, and that had an influence on the school board. There were complaints because people found out he was coming, and then there were complaints, and then they had a meeting, and they said he couldn't come. So I come home very disappointed, and I talked to my dad, and he called John Reynolds, who was the Attorney General.
Okay.
Well, John Reynolds called Weston, and he told him that they couldn't deny him the right to come. So they reversed their decision.
Okay.
There was a lot of publicity about that in this respect. We had to notify everybody that it was canceled and send out postcards. And then to turn it around, we had to send out postcards again to notify everybody that he was coming.
Yeah.
But here was the interesting thing. The local press here, Reedsburg and Richland Center, didn't cover it. And the local radio stations, Reedsburg and Richland Center, didn't cover it. At that time, Richland and Sauk County was a very embedded Republican. And so, you know.
Yeah, thus the lack of coverage.
Pardon?
Thus the lack of coverage of the event. Like
Yeah.
it is hard to find any newspaper clippings or of
that's
that particular
right.
event.
That's right.
And that just is amazing.
And what a mistake that was for them to ignore that piece of history.
Yeah.
Now, Mr. Harper from Reedsburg, I understand that he took a lot of pictures here. I never got to see any of those pictures.
Okay. And
he passed away.
Yeah. So I'm going to just put a shout out to the community. If anyone in our community happens to have any Kennedy photos from that particular day, you can, on our Facebook page, go ahead and submit those or drop them off at a copy at the school. We'd love to see those pictures. I do have a few pictures here, and I'm going to put those in our video. The first one I have is, it looks like President Kennedy is probably signing an autograph, and you are right behind him, smiling ear to ear.
Yes.
And I don't know if you can see this picture down or not, but I think this is one you shared with us.
Yes, that's right. I don't know who he was shaking hands with. But yes, he went through the crowd that day.
Okay.
And he made an attempt to reach out to everyone and shake hands with them. One of the things that I thought was very gracious, my mother was sitting down in a row of chairs, about in the middle of the chairs, and I pointed out to Kennedy, I said, "That's my mom over there." And he walked over and shook hands with her, which I thought was very nice.
What a special moment for your mom.
Yes.
And, the fact that you could kind of pull strings and,
yes.
and do that, I'm sure.
Interestingly, the grade school kids came from a lot of the local schools as well.
Sure.
The gym was packed.
Yeah. Tell me about in your summary of the day, you estimate anywhere from 800 to 1,000 people here.
Yes, I don't know what the capacity of the gym was, but there wasn't room for any
Standing
more
room
people.
only then.
Pardon?
Standing room only mostly.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
The whole floor was full of chairs.
Okay.
The bleachers were full. The hallways were full.
Okay.
Here, when we got here, there was a crowd outside, and we walked through a crowd from the front door all the way to the gym. And when we entered the gym door, I'll never forget the smile on his face. When we entered the gym door, the students had been coached ahead of time. Everybody stood and gave him a round of applause as we walked in. And at the same time, the band struck up when Irish Eyes Were Smiling.
Now there's a story there.
Yes.
Tell the people who might not know why they chose that particular song.
Well, it was Kennedy was Irish, you know,
Sure.
and they were very proud of their Irish heritage, and of course, Irish Eyes Are Smiling is a traditional celebrating song.
Yes.
Among the Irish, and especially around St. Patrick's Day.
Yes.
It was a favorite song of Kennedy's, and I forget the name of. He had a crowd of buddies around him all the time.
Uh-huh.
After he got involved in politics, and he had a friend who used to play the piano, and he would play When Irish Eyes Are Smiling, and Billy, won't you
Would you come home?
won't you please come home?
Yeah.
And I can imagine Kennedy smiled the same way that he had a magnificent smile. He smiled from ear to ear when that song came on.
Sure.
We had the welcoming committee of the 4 students, seniors, who escorted him up the center aisle to the stage.
Uh-huh.
They sat down, and he sat down, and then I introduced him. He spoke for about 20, 25 minutes.
Okay.
And it was he was an excellent speaker. He had a beautiful cadence, and he had that the Boston Irish drawl,
Yep.
which was very appealing, you know. And I remember he opened up by saying, I suppose you wonder what us Easterners are doing here in farm country in Wisconsin. And then he talked about LaFollette, old Bob LaFollette,
Yeah.
who designed the Wisconsin primary system, which came out of the University of Wisconsin. There was a lot of political thought in the University of Wisconsin that went into the progressive era.
Sure.
And that was one of the progressive ideas, the open primary. And so he talked about that primary, and it was interesting. We invited Nixon to come as well. Nixon wrote a nice letter. It was posted on the office window, and said that he couldn't come. I mean, I never found out what happened to that letter. But
So that's an interesting thing. In one of my episodes with Mrs. Nash, she talks about that too, that letter, and that she wishes that she could know where that is today. So you don't know where that is.
No, I never knew.
Who might have come into it.
It probably went into someone in the office may have picked it up. They might not have recognized the importance of it historically, or maybe the principal felt he should have a souvenir.
Well, I'll put that out to the community as well. If that's out in the community somewhere, or you know of where that might be, make a copy and send it to us. We'd love to see that.
I wanted to tell you one quick story about that trip from Casanova to Weston.
Yes.
As we turned the corner off of 58 onto S, there was a farmer on the right, Bernard Hanko, and he was out spreading manure. He had a 4.8N tractor, and the manure spreader was moving along, and the manure was flying in the air. And as we drove up the road, he probably saw the car top signs or something. And of course, everybody knew that Kennedy was coming. Well, when we got here, and we just sat down at the stage, and Kennedy was just introduced, and here comes Bernard Hanko and his wife in his striped overalls right out of the barn down the aisle. He wasn't going to miss that. Doc Bible from Lime Ridge, the dentist, who was quite elderly, was here.
Okay.
And lots of folks that in the community were here,
Yeah.
you know, adult families.
I'm sure they were both Democrat and Republican.
Yes, they were.
Because they
And Kennedy did very well in this
Yeah.
district.
Yeah.
He did himself a lot of good here. He talked about Latin America and Cuba and you pronounce it Cuba,
Yeah.
and the Alliance for Progress idea that he had. He talked about the Peace Corps
Sure.
proposal, and he just generated so much enthusiasm among people. It was a very interesting day.
Yeah.
What was also interesting was what happened after he left here.
Okay, tell me about that. What when you say that, what are you specifically referring to?
Well, in the caravan, and you mentioned earlier, this is a digression, that there wasn't any press here. There was a reporter in the caravan following the caravan from the Chicago Tribune.
Okay.
And that was the only reporter that was here.
All right.
And an uncle of mine who lived in Milwaukee sent me a little clipping of that visit that he had here. That's the only press that I know of.
Okay. And he mentions Weston?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. He mentioned.
And you do you still have that clipping?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't have.
Well, we'll have to look that up. Absolutely.
Yes.
That's well. Speaking of looking up, I did look up and I found this. This is from the Capital Times.
Oh, yes.
April 5th, 1960. And you must have been on a something for the FFA. You're in a nice FFA jacket here.
Yes,
and
I remember that very well.
And you're holding up Kennedy for president, like newspaper or something like that.
Yes.
You want to quickly kind of tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, that was interesting. Of course, right in the middle of this primary campaign, it was after Kennedy had visited here. Joe Piplinski took us to Madison on some sort of an FFA trip. And at noontime, we all walked up to the square, and there was a campaign headquarters for Kennedy there near the square. And I picked up a few of these flyers. They were looking for volunteers to pass out flyers on the square. So I picked up a few of those, and I was passing them out on the square. And Miles McMillan, who was the editor of the Capital Times, and a photographer came along, and they took my picture and asked me a couple of questions, you know, how I felt about the campaign. I think I predicted that Kennedy would win in a close call in Wisconsin. Yeah. More interesting than also tied to that, that same day, here comes a bus around the square. All kinds of music and noise and loudspeakers going. And it was a Humphrey for President bus. Okay. And there was a crowd of Humphrey followers there waiting to greet him. And he stopped and he got out and he gave a stem-winding speech to the crowd. And several of us were standing back in the crowd with our FFA jackets. And Hubert Humphrey says, I see those farm boys out there. He said that I love the farmers. You know, he was a great politician. Yeah. And it was a very heated campaign between Kennedy and Humphrey. Sure. I remember that quite well.
I have some questions. I asked some of our students, you know, if they could ask you some questions.
Oh,
what
sure.
questions would they ask? And I'm gonna we got to do this because I want to make sure that I don't go too long. I promise.
Go as long as you want.
Okay. So
I can talk all day.
Well, sure. All right. So
I'm accused of that, talking too much.
Okay. Let me and granted, they didn't get a chance to sit with you like I have, so some of these questions might be repeated, but
sure.
I'll just Okay, so you said you wrote a letter. This student asks, why did you write that letter? What made got into you that you would write a letter to ask the senator to come visit Weston?
Well, I wrote the letter to Nixon. We'd already asked through
Okay,
orally
got it.
through Mayor Nessigan for Kennedy to come, and we felt that out of fairness, we should ask both. And I think that was because our advisor,
Okay,
advised us to do that, and it was the prudent thing to do. And so that's why we wrote the letter. We wrote the letter. We made the invitations initially because we were discussing the presidential campaign in our social science class, social studies classes. Grace Schaller was one of our teachers, a very fine teacher, and she guided us along in our studies, and we came up with this idea. It would be great to see a discussion of this, and so I got this light bulb in my head to call Kennedy, and then she advised us to call Nixon.
yeah, equal treatment to both sides.
Yes.
Yeah, equal time. So that was a fourth grade student asking that. This is Jeffrey. Jeffrey is asking, how old was Kennedy when he came? Do you recall? So how old he would have been?
Well, Kennedy was the youngest president, I believe, to serve. Theodore Roosevelt, I believe, was the youngest elected president. It's either that way or the other way.
Yeah.
And he was around 42.
Okay.
Yeah. Very young man.
Okay.
Our video ends right there for the moment. Thank you to Don Seep, class of 1960 here at Weston. And I wanted to say that if you have any questions that you are curious about the visit from John F. Kennedy on March 25th, 1960, please put them in the comments below and on Facebook, and we will follow up with that. I would love to do a follow-up episode with Don just to find out a few more details of that day and other events that he remembers from his time here at Weston. What a fascinating guest he was for me here at Weston, and I just want to thank him and also his lovely wife, Susan. So thank you. And we're going to end with Don signing us off. I was in our video, Soar, Eagle, Soar.
Eagle Pride.
All right.
Walking in the halls, gonna find out about someone new today. Finding out something about that friend, gonna learn something new today. Here at Weston Elementary, gonna find out about someone new each and every episode.